What's going on, y'all? It's David or Dawhveed. So with Mayhem Mode 2.0 coming out, and with how actually insane Mayhem 10 modifiers turned out to be, I had to really step it up for this one for this build making process. This build that I've dubbed the Fl4k is a full build primarily built around the new annoyance such as 300% bonus weapon damage if the enemy's over 90% health, and on action skill start trigger all effects on shield break and fill. It features the returning Sandhawk weapon as well as uses rack attacks in a neat way, which is why I've decided to call it the Fl4k. So without further ado, I'll kick it off with the skill tree first and go over some of the more important things here. So first, you probably noticed that this is indeed a double capstone build showcasing Megavore and the power inside. Megavore is great with leave no trace and head count because your crits from your Sandhawk and even grenade can proc each of these, giving you ammo returns and action skill cooldown reductions. The power inside here is just for the raw damage that is needed for Mayhem 10, and with the hunter skill package with things like the most dangerous game and big game, once you kill an enemy and start building stacks, you should be mowing down everyone else. Eager to impress is really important here because of the new neat function with one of the shield annoyance. You really want to be able to rack attack as quickly as possible on a whim. The action skill for this build, as I said before, is rack attack, and the augments that I prefer are Falconer's Feast and Rack Accelerate. Falconer's Feast is definitely helpful in sapping some health back for when I get too low on HP, which tends to happen quite a bit on Mayhem 10. Right? Go figure. It also helps keep up my bonuses for the Fast and the Furious and the Power Inside, which both actually require you to be at a healthy amount of HP. The pet that I prefer here is the Spider Ant Scorcher because she gives a great boost to elemental damage, and every weapon in this build is elementally attuned. Now onto my favorite part of the build, the gear. I run 3 weapons for this build, and each weapon has a very specific purpose that it fulfills. So my first weapon, the one that ties the Fl4k theme together with the rack attacks, is the returning Sandhawk legendary weapon. The Sandhawk that I run here is a shock damage version with the 100% rack attack anointment. The Sandhawk does surprisingly great damage, and when it's backed up by the rack slag anointment that causes enemies to take double the damage, you can now just pretty much mow through enemies. This gun is great for death kills. If you don't know, death is a Mayhem 10 modifier, and it can spawn from any dead body of an enemy that you kill. If it touches you, it will instantly put you in the fight for your life. If I see death chasing me, all it takes is really like a rack attack and some Sandhawk burst, and it'll clean it up pretty quickly. My next weapon is actually a radiation lob. This weapon is rarely brought out, but when I do bring it out, it does a damn good job of what I need it for. I have the lifesteal anointment on this weapon because it does a huge burst of damage, and combined with my Falconer's Feast rack attack, I'm usually back to full health in no time. I also chose the lob because it doesn't share ammo reserves with any of the other guns that I use for this build. This lob is also pretty good at taking down deaths and the smaller enemies. But for the bigger enemies, I use the big daddy with fat damages of this build, the new Yellow Cake launcher. Most of you have probably already figured this out by now, but this gun does huge damages. The anointment that I chose was the 300 bonus weapon damage one because when I use this, I just want to one-shot every single enemy that I hit with it and make sure that I don't really have to worry about them. This gun is great for mobbing, and I use it on the enemies that are the most troublesome, such as like badass enemies or anointed ones. The key is to shoot it at like a medium range so that the projectiles have a chance to split up for the most damage and area covered. Now onto the support gear for this build. The shield that I run is actually the hidden hero of this build because without it, Mayhem 10 would be pretty much nearly impossible, and that shield is a stopgap with the new anointment where once you use your action skill, you trigger any effects on your shield that are activated once it breaks or fills. With the stopgap having the ability to make you immune to damage once your shield breaks, this anointment means that every time you rack attack, you will trigger that shield break effect and be immune to damage for 5 seconds. This is very obviously extremely strong, and it's the reason why you want to have your racks up and ready to go whenever you're about to take damage. My grenade for this build is a Mitosis Hunter Seeker, because this grenade can actually trigger crits to return ammo to my magazine and reduce my action skill cooldown time. I chose to use one with the ASC Cryo Anoint to do some armor damage to the yellow health bar enemies. This is also the reason that I chose to use a shock damage Sandhawk Sniper. If you look at all of my weapons for this build, the shock damage Sandhawk, the radiation lob, and the radiation yellow cake, they all deal really good damage versus shielded enemies, but against armored enemies, they're pretty gimped. With the bonus cryo damage that I get from this grenade anointment, each time I rack attack, I can cover that weakness and deal really good damage versus armored enemies as well. Another anointment that's really good for the grenade here instead of the cryo one is the on action skill start regen a grenade. This just ensures that you never really run out of grenades, which also would mean that you never really run out of ammo since your grenades can crit for Megavore. Now for my class mod, this is really where the build gets tied together and comes alive. I use a Deadeye class mod because I deal extra, even more damage versus enemies that are above 75% health. This is what leads to me one-shotting mobs with the yellow cake and dealing high burst damage with my Sandhawk sniper. The stats that I rolled into this are splash damage, action skill cooldown rate, and heavy weapon damage. The splash damage is great for all three of my guns, the action skill cooldown rate is great for the super important rack attacks, and the heavy weapon damage is really just the icing on the cake. Or the icing on the yellow cake? And lastly for this build, I have the artifact, the Snowdrift Victory Rush. Snowdrifts are just second to none in artifacts built for mobility, and Victory Rushes are pretty much second to none for artifacts that give you damage boosts. The stats on this one are action skill cooldown rate, AoE damage, and magazine size. The action skill cooldown rate is again really important for rack attacks, the AoE damage is great for the rack attack damage and my gun damage, and lastly the magazine size is just great to have on the Sandhawk for more consistent damage. That is actually going to wrap it up for my full Fl4k flak build. If you stick around, I'll briefly go over the general gameplay guide for this build, but if not, I would just like to thank you for taking the time to watch this build, and I hope that it helps you clear Mayhem 10. If you liked the video, please make sure to go rack attack the hell out of that thumbs up button, and make sure to leave me a comment down below or in Discord, and I'll most certainly reply as quickly as possible. Okay, so for those of you that are sticking around, the mobbing strategy, I first like to clear up the bulk of the enemies with a yellow cake. With this gun, you should be standing like a good distance away so the projectiles have time to split up and cover the largest area. I try to focus more on the badass enemies or the clumped up enemies. During this time, I do also like to chuck nades to get ammo back and reduce my action skill cooldown while I'm shooting the enemies. Then, once I do that, when I'm done with the yellow cake, usually there are some deaths, so I just swap to my Sandhawk and clean those up along with the remaining enemies after I rack attack again. Anytime during this, if I get extremely low on health, I swap to my lob to regen back to full HP, and once I'm comfortably high on HP, I'll swap back to my launcher or sniper depending on the enemy count. For bossing, you can pretty much just take the yellow cake and one-shot the bosses. I swap to a one-shotter shield for bossing and just leave everything else the same. Just pull up to the bosses from a good distance and shoot off the yellow cake after a rack attack, and if that doesn't do it, swap to the Sandhawk and finish it off. For the more prolonged boss fights that you can't just one-shot your way through, just shoot off your yellow cake at a good distance and then fight the rest with your lob and the Sandhawk. That's going to be it for my full Fl4k flak build guide. Make sure to gamma burst that subscribe button and notification bell to stay up to date on all of my content, and I will check you all in the next video. See ya!